Hey everybody, Captain Nasty's here, and this video is going to be about implementing tactile feedback, better known as bass shakers, to a sim racing rig. And this video is going to be a little bit longer than my other videos because it's a very deep topic. So stick with me. And that being said, let's jump right in. Just first of all, my goal for tactile feedback was my budget was approximately $500. I ended up spending more than that. We'll get more into that later. And I wanted a setup that would provide force feedback from the game, specifically to my rig, and those were really my only, I guess you'd call, requirements and constraints. I'll save the console guys some trouble and some time right now. I do not recommend tactile feedback on a rig that does not support taking game force feedback output and being able to supply that as the signal to your transducers or your bass shakers. There's no real reason to have engine rumble and crashes and just low frequency sound coming through your racing rig. To me, it might make it a little bit more fun and cool, but it for me, it's not money well spent. I'd rather spend money on other parts of my rig and focus on other things if I'm a console guy. Now on the PC, I think it's totally worth every penny. I've got $600 into my setup, and my rig feels dead without it. Now, I'm not saying it's more important than having like a good input devices, like a good wheel, good pedal set, shifters. I certainly would choose VR any day over my tactile feedback setup. So guys, if you're into triple screens or VR and you're trying to weigh if you do the tactile or that first, I definitely would do that first. But I would say after those priorities of input devices and visuals, I would say tactile feedback would be next for sure. And it's a lot cheaper than motion. Of course, a motion rig would be awesome, but starting at $3,000, it still seems like it's maturing, the technology, and I'm never an early adopter. If you're watching this video, that I review things once I've had them for a while. I don't do reviews on brand new hot stuff because I'm not some big shot YouTuber guy. Anyways, so yeah, I think it would rate, that'd be the priorities that I stated previously. I'm very happy with my setup, and so on to my setup. I'm going to tell you a little bit where I started, and that'll help you understand how I got where I'm at today. So I started out with 4 Aurora Pro bass shakers running off 2 Chinese amps. They were 2-channel amps, so I had a separate channel for each shaker. And my plan was to run, each tire per shaker, which is a very, common setup. And I got that all hooked up, and it, running, and I did not use SimVibe. I used another shaking program called Sim Shaker Wheels, and that program didn't really offer separation for all 4 different wheels. SimVibe was $90. It was just more than I wanted to spend, so I ended up just doing a front and rear setup on Sim Shaker Wheels, and going with that, and it was really good. I had a lot of fun kind of learning how to tune it, and then after I wasn't even finished playing with the program or tuning, and one of the Chinese amps burned up. So then I elected to just run just 2 shakers rather than 4, and of course it wasn't nearly as strong. And then I decided, well, maybe I should upgrade and go with a better amp and kind of kick my setup here up a couple notches. So I went from spending like $100 on amps to spending $300, and I went with the inuke 1000 DSP. It's a studio audio amp. It's really cool, and it's rated to put out 300 watts on each channel continuously at 4 ohms. So it's got some good power for sure. And it's very tunable as well. With the DSP version of that amp, you can plug it into your PC and set up your equalizer. You can set up the crossovers and all that stuff that I touch on in more detail later in the video. So I think that was money well spent for sure. Lots of value in the $300 I spent on the inuke 1000 DSP amp. So that's what I've got. That's what I've got running now. I did take, so I lost an amp and had 2 spare shakers. So I ended up putting those 2 shakers on my flight sim rig, and now I've got 1 Aurora Pro bass shaker that's rated at 50 watts continuous, 100 watts peak, 4 ohms in my pedals, and I have a Buttkicker Advance that's rated at 75 watts minimum, 400 watts maximum, also 4 ohms, that's mounted at the back of my seat here onto the crossbar where it mounts on the aluminum rig. So that's the hardware that I've got right now. One thing to note, if you don't use VR, you will need 2 sound cards to do this. So that's a cost you need to consider as well. If you're a triple screen or single screen guy, you will need 2 sound cards to have tactile feedback. And I didn't have to do that, so I'm not going to speak anymore on that topic, but I do know that's a requirement that you have. Now, if you're on Rift or VR like I am, then you can just use the stock sound card and it works fantastic. So that's my setup. That's kind of how I got there. I burned up those amps, and in my experience, bass transducers like wattage. So the Auroras I'm running, they're only rated 100 watts max, and I hit them with 300, and I definitely keep the volume, turned down on that channel, and watch. The amp will tell you if there's clipping, just like any other amp that has lights, and if the little red light on the top goes, you're clipping. So I prevent it from clipping because I'm sure that if I let that thing clip and run at high volume, it would probably tear that thing up pretty quick. So yeah, I'm gonna let's see, I'll talk really quickly about wiring too. So another thing you can do with bass shakers, so if you want to have 4 shakers running on a 2-channel amp, you can wire them in parallel. And I'll post a link on how to do that in this video. Parallel wiring is cool because it cuts the impedance in half, which means it's more or less going to double the output of the amp. So each shaker is going to be getting a lot of power that way, and that would certainly be a good way to go. Again, for me, I went with a front and rear setup, and just with 2 shakers. And so let me tell you why I went with the front and rear setup. It's because I really, would prefer, in a perfect world, I'd have 4, maybe even 6 shakers, and I'd spent $90 on SimVibe and have the whole 4 corners thing jumping off. But that really doubles the cost of my system here, right? At $300 a pop, I would need 2 amps. That's getting pretty. That's more money than I want to spend. I think the cost benefit ratio for going from 2 channels to 4 is not there, in my opinion. So that's another reason I wound up with the front rear, just with one shaker setup. And so for the reason I did that is you can get different effects from tire slippage go to each transducer, and that's really cool. So I'll show you later in the Shake It program, which is run. It's SimHub. It's a plugin for SimHub, which I can't say enough about SimHub. SimHub is a really cool no-cost program. And it enables all kinds of advanced stuff for sim racing that I maybe we'll talk about in the future. But it's really great. Go check it out. And their Shake It program is way better than the program that I was using previously that I had to pay for. So back to front and rear. So you can get wheel slip from acceleration, which I send to the back shaker, and you can actually get not only brake lockup, but they call it wheel slide. And that's when you're like pushing the front end and you're starting to break the maximum level of traction on the front end. With the front tires, I can feel that in my front pedals, and let me tell you, that really helps. And I think it could make you faster for sure. I don't see how it could hurt with your lap times. You have more information about what the tires are doing. So let me see. We talked about wiring. We talked about all the equipment. Let's go ahead and just actually flip the rig over and take a look and see how I've got these things mounted. Okay, so here she is, and this is my racing rig turned over on its side, and I have casters on here, and the casters are actually part of the tactile feedback setup because they're rubber and they provide some isolation that keeps the vibrations in the rig. So definitely you want to have some. Don't mount your rig flat on the ground and expect to have good tactile feedback. You're going to lose vibration to the ground. For me, I need to move things around. The casters just made way too much sense. So you can see again, this aluminum plate looks like Swiss cheese because I built this to mount my Fanatic wheelbase to my play seat, and then I repurposed it to mount the bass shaker. So you can see how that's mounted there. It's vertically. That is the recommended way to do it from Buttkicker. It does have better response under 18 hertz like this. In terms of the overall force, I would say it's about the same. I had it mounted vertically, just so you can see the slots right here, and I had it mounted just vertically like that before, and I was expecting more of a difference when I mounted it like that, but luckily it was free and didn't take me much time to do. And then what you see here is my Aurora Pro in the front, and you can see this metal plate I had here, and again, this is something that I had built to mount my Fanatic V3 inverted pedals to my playseat. So I cut it down and recycled it and made it a platform to mount the shaker to the pedals. And you can see here too, I put a little bit of rubber in between. This is actually from a home store. It's like weather stripping. And I didn't want to have vibrations between this plate and my 80-20 bass. And I also want to have some isolation so that the vibrations would go into my feet and not into the rig. So I think this serves two purposes by having that there. So that's how that stuff is mounted. I'd be curious to learn more about like mounting and how this stuff, you know, how you can get the most out of it on the mounting. I know that there's a lot of different ways to mount this stuff, and that's just how I've kind of done it. I'm going to show you my flight rig because I've experimented, and you can see here it's wood. I freaking hate wood. You can tell I love aluminum. I like to TIG weld and, you know, play around with drill presses and mills and whatnot. But yeah, again, this is just on the pedal box, and yes, it is zip tied. Yes, that is janky. Yes, it rattles unless your feet are on the rudder pedals. All the above. You know, I don't take my flight rig nearly as seriously as my sim rig. But yeah, you can see just mounted to a wood box there. This thing vibrates like real good, even on the wood. I think if you had a wood rig, you could get some good vibration effect, in my opinion, from a wood rig for sure. I mean, this is my only test with wood, what you're seeing here, but I think that would work. So that's where I've got them mounted. And then we'll jump into the next part of the video here.
All right, hello everybody. So now we're looking at my PC here, and what you'll see is when you connect the inuke to the PC via USB, you get this. You can control everything. It's awesome. So first of all, if you have two shakers, you want to make sure that it's in stereo mode. So it's going to put different signals out to channel A and channel B, and then you can put a crossover on. Now my crossover is tuned so it pretty much kills everything off, you know, really after 100 hertz or so. Let me actually increase that a bit. So both these shakers I have are rated up to 200 hertz, but it's really not where I feel like you get much benefit from them. So I tend to run this flat, you know, crossover here, where none of these higher frequencies are going to get there. Now, if you're going to use your system without a way to get force feedback through it, this is definitely how you want to have it set up. So on my flight simulator, I have to run it like this, otherwise I get all kinds of high frequency crap coming through my transducers, and it's no good. I have not yet messed around with the equalizer settings, because I feel like if I boost the bottom end any more than it already is, I'm just going to clip, and I just like the way it feels right now in terms of the higher frequency effects and the lower frequency effects are come out in an equal volume, and for me that's definitely a good thing. So that's the amp setup. The most important thing is that you get the configuration right. So stereo, and then filter here is highlighted because I have a preset in the crossover. This software is very, very easy to use. The crossover, essentially this is, so you can look up the frequency response range of your shakers, and you essentially want to cut it off so nothing above that goes to them. It might damage them. It just don't sound right. It's just you don't want to waste your time doing that. So let's open up SimHub. SimHub is super cool, and you can see last thing I played was Assetto Corsa, and again, I'm gonna make a whole nother video on this, but it's cool. There's live output, so you can actually visualize, you know, what's being sent to your shakers, which really helps with tuning them, in my opinion. And you can adjust, you know, the threshold, you know, the type of I mean, this program it's for being free content. It's really amazing. I mean, I donated these guys like with the quickness once I messed around with it some more. And typically you're going to want to set your frequencies here to what your shakers can handle. The Buttkicker says it goes down to 5 hertz, but it really doesn't seem to provide good feedback at much under 15, so I just turned it up to 15 there. The most important part about I think the coolest thing about Shake It, for sure, is what I'm about to show you. So you go into bass shaker settings here, and so this is where you really tell the game feedback specifically what channel of your amp you want it to go to, and then of course your amp is wired up, you know, to a specific transducer. So channel 1 is my pedal box, and channel 2 is my rear transducer. So you can see here I sent front left and front right vibration to the front unit, so you feel bumps up front, rear left and rear right vibration to the back. For wheel slide, so this is not on the gas slide, that's down here. This is somehow they have a way to figure it out where when you're like pushing the front end, you can feel it. This is huge for me. I love feeling the front end start to push. So I sent that to my transducer in my pedal box. The same as wheel lock. This is like when you lock up the wheel, like when you just lock up. That's what happens there. Obviously, that goes to the front pedal box. On the gas, I wanted to feel that in my ass, so I sent that to my rear transducer. And then I typically drive, rear-wheel drive stuff and some all-wheel drive stuff. For gear shifts, I wanted to feel this in my butt, so I selected that on there. But this, it might not seem like much, but being able to specifically tell, a program what effects you want to go to what channel of your amp is absolutely critical. And that's just a huge benefit of SimHub, and that's really what makes my my whole setup work. So so that's about it. One last thing I wanted to mention: you will need 2 sound cards to do this if you are going to be using a triple screen setup, or if you're not in VR. For guys like me that are on VR, one, the stock Reaktek sound card is all I need. VR has its own, audio thing going on, and I can use my sound card to put this out to my amp that goes to my shakers. So that's about it, guys. I know that was a long video. Hopefully it was helpful. I think it's a really cool topic. And if you have any insights or want to compare setups or just call me an idiot, go ahead, do it in the comments, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.